And good afternoon, and welcome to the Cape Town Press Club lunch. We are going to be, if you could please switch your cell phones and things off, because this event is live streamed. Welcome also to Diplomatic Corps. We have diplomats today from Angola, Belgium, Brazil, France, Maldives, Namibia, Netherlands, Paraguay, Peru, Romania, Russia, Spain, Switzerland, Turkey, the United States, and Vanuatu. A round of applause for you diplomats. Thank you to our sponsors, Tsitsikamma for the water, Distel for the wines, and for the continued and loyal support of the Ben and Shirley Rabinowitz Foundation. Today, I'm going to keep this short. He's got another appointment soon. We welcome back Geordin Hill-Lewis, this time as the elected mayor of the city of Cape Town. He's been a member of the Democratic Alliance since high school, right through university. And when he was elected to Parliament in 2011 at the age of 24, he was the youngest MP elected then. He has a master's degree in finance from the University of London, and so he was the DA's Shadow Minister for Finance and its Shadow Minister for Trade and Industry. He served for 5 years as Chief of Staff to then leader of the Democratic Alliance and Premier of the Western Cape, Helen Zille, who we also welcome here today. And now, to speak to us about his first 100 days in office as the mayor, please welcome the Honourable Geordin Hill-Lewis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and members of the Cape Town Press Club and members of the Press Corps, ladies and gentlemen, all of the distinguished guests and consuls general. It really is lovely to see you all again, a few months after I spoke on this stage as a candidate, to report back on my first 100 days and how they have flown by. But why, before I start, I thought it might be useful to just talk about why we care about the 100-day mark and why it has come to be important in our politics. There's no constitutional significance at all to the first 100 days of an elected official's time in office. It is quite arbitrary and artificial. So why is it important? I found out that the tradition of marking 100 days originated in the presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt. When he was inaugurated in March, the American consul representatives are nodding their heads. When he was inaugurated in March 1934, the US had just been through 4 years of extreme hardship after the Great Depression. On taking office, FDR summons Congress into an extraordinary 100-day-long legislative session, during which he presented and managed to get passed no less than 15 major bills designed to counter the effects of the Great Depression, and 76 minor pieces of legislation that signaled his intention to get America back on its feet through the revival of its economy, including taking the country off the gold standard, initiating massive public works programs, offering assistance to farmers and the unemployed, and finally ending prohibition, for which we are no doubt very grateful. FDR's first 100 days in office was such an incredible feat of political energy and ingenuity that they are now held up as the gold standard against which the performance of all other US presidents are measured, and it seems politicians across the world. So despite this foreign genesis, I think the 100-day concept is still relevant to us here, because it gives the public a chance to hold us, and me in particular now, publicly and immediately accountable for the things that we said just a few months ago in the election. And I welcome the opportunity to be held accountable in that way today. It also struck me on the way over here that in many ways this is more important than making a speech as we hear from many other politicians and from the president last Thursday evening about what one plans to do in the future. This is not a statement of plans to come, but an assessment of performance that has been. In our own much more modest way, of course, We have used the past 100 days in office. Actually, the 100 days is next week. It's either Sunday or next week, Monday. So we're a week early. And as you know, a week is a long time in politics. So I'll be back next week to tell you about all I've done. We've used these first 100 days to get Cape Town back on track, onto a new path of prosperity and success. We've done so guided by a spirit of caring for our fellow residents, caring about their dignity, and caring about the opportunities that they have to lead a happier, safer, and more prosperous life, free from the privations of poverty. We have shown that we want Cape Town to take its rightful place among the truly great cities of the world. And we unashamedly want to do big, brave, and excellent things here in Cape Town, because South Africa desperately needs one demonstration that we can still move forward towards the society described in our Constitution. Now, when I started speaking about that back here on this stage a few months ago, and in the campaign more generally, I could not have foreseen at that stage that, in fact, I would be joined by 3 other metropolitan mayors, and in fact, several dozen others in smaller towns and cities, who have set about with serious energy doing exactly the same thing. And that is really, really encouraging to see and very inspiring. The pervasive sense of decline and cynicism felt by so many across the country can, we believe, slowly be turned into optimism for the future again. And we believe that it is really an important part of our job in Cape Town to show that that's possible. We never ever want South Africa to become used to failure. Instead, we must aim higher, lift our sights, be more ambitious, and set the bar for a commitment to professionalism, meritocracy, and success. And in so doing, all that we do is with the intention of helping to grow the economy meaningfully faster so that we can lift more people out of poverty over time. That is what we call, and I talk about this nearly every day in our government, our sense of clear, higher purpose. And it is what motivates everything that we have done and will do for the next 5 years. We cannot possibly, in South Africa, where we find ourselves as a country, be in government just for the sake of being in government or keeping out the opposition. We do have a clear sense of higher purpose, and that is to turn around that sense of decline that increasingly, at a national level at least, may seem inevitable, but here we are proving that it can be reversible and that there can be optimism for the future again. And let me say that at the outset, I must report to you that I am absolutely loving the job, loving every minute of it, in fact. I feel deeply privileged to hold this office. Without doubt, one of the best jobs in South African politics, and Helen always says the same. She's done them all. And frankly, one of the coolest jobs in world politics. The problems are profoundly difficult, complex, and intellectually stimulating. Every single decision matters in the real world, and each small step in the right direction gives one a profound sense of personal meaning and purpose. The people are fantastic, both our Team Cape Town colleagues and the residents, even when they're grumpy, which they usually have some good reason to be, by the way. And I'm very much enjoying working with Alan and the Western Cape team, who absolutely share our commitment to getting the economy growing faster as the primary means of rolling back poverty in our society. I can confidently say that there is a renewed sense of urgency and optimism inside the city, and hopefully that will filter out to the rest of the city and the residents in the months ahead. So we feel that we are on track, that we've made a good start, and that there is forward momentum. Those who knew me in a slightly different life will know that I am a finance man, as the chairman has said. I've often said, if you want to know what a government really cares about, look at their budget. Don't listen to their speeches. So let's start there. Throughout December and January, the city's treasury team and I collectively spent hundreds of hours ensuring that our January adjustment budget reflected our promises to make Cape Town a more caring city that invests in infrastructure needed to improve basic service delivery on the ground. I've made my expectations clear. Our current level of infrastructure spending is not adequate. We will spend significantly more on capital investment in the coming 5 years, particularly on sewer, water, public transport, and electricity infrastructure. So much of the story of South Africa's decline over the last decade is actually a story of a failure to invest adequately in infrastructure and gross fixed capital formation. And we're not going to follow that route in Cape Town. We are going to spend significantly more on that essential infrastructure that improves basic service delivery. From the outset, our budget has signaled that we are and will be a government which prioritizes the dignity of all of our residents, including and especially the least well-off. We are committed to improving Cape Townians' quality of life, even as the city's population grows at a rate far exceeding the national average. And I'll come back to this later. In these early days, we've also had our fair share of crises to deal with, starting in late December with a 27-hour power cut that affected hundreds of thousands of households in the CBD and across the seaboard, when a fire in a cable tunnel blew an Eskom ultra-high voltage line that supplies a huge portion of the city. This was somewhat of a baptism of fire, but offered a helpful lesson, which I've tried to put into practice immediately. Our residents like to be kept informed even when the news is bad, and be able to interact with the city on the basis of openness and honesty. They want to see us at work and be able to trust that we see them and that we are telling them what is really happening. So I've instituted an approach to communications that those younger members in the audience who find themselves on Instagram or TikTok will have no doubt noticed, on issues that affect them. We respond to residents' queries and concerns on social media. We give them insights into the day-to-day functioning of the mayor's office and the city at large. The skill and dedication of our electricity engineers and their teams, who worked through that night and all of the next day with no rest, underscored to me how blessed Cape Town is, with truly talented and committed and professional officials, the team that I now refer to as Team Cape Town. Besides the cable fire, we had the Parliament fire, and we hosted an historic State of the Nation address at our magnificent, fully renovated and painstakingly restored City Hall. We dealt with the horrible news of the red listing in December, just as we were on the cusp of our busiest tourist season in 3 years, and had to pivot almost overnight to a domestic tourism campaign and other fresh ideas like open streets dining in Cape Town streets to help get businesses through. And of course, we bade a moving Cape Town farewell to our beloved Archbishop Desmond Tutu. These unexpected events have only buttressed and supported our efforts to position Cape Town as the exemplar of the best of what we South Africans can do. And although they have been stressful and even tragic, these events have given me a lot of insight early on into the significance and importance and honor and privilege of this role. Every day, I feel like I'm doing something significant, driven by that clear sense of higher purpose. But what does this mean practically? When I spoke here last time, I said that it was unacceptable that load shedding had become so normal in South Africa. All that we hear about economic growth and poverty and unemployment from the lips of politicians around the country at the national level is all, frankly, just lip service when you do not even have the power necessary to power your economy. I have said that we simply cannot continue to wait for an increasingly disintegrating national state to sort this out. We have learned enough now to know that it is unlikely to happen. Our lack of energy security constitutes an economic emergency, and it is the single biggest handbrake on our economic reform plans as a country. I've pushed the team extremely hard to get this done in 3 months, and some of our lawyers, present company excluded, have been very nervous about us proceeding so fast. But last week, we announced the opening of our first round of procurement of power from independent power producers. The city will be going to procure between 200 and 300 megawatts from independent power producers, so-called IPPs, for projects that will give us access to affordable and reliable electricity supply, especially during the peak times, so that we can reduce our reliance on Eskom at those peak times when load shedding is most likely. We will consider proposals from a range of projects, including generation only, generation plus storage, and storage only. These are the first but crucial bold steps towards energy security in Cape Town that will, over time, protect residents from the failure of Eskom and provide the biggest possible boost to our economy. So it is not just about overcoming the inconvenience of load shedding. It is absolutely focused on that clear sense of higher purpose, which is to get people out of poverty over time by growing the economy faster. Let me turn now to infrastructure. I said I was going to come back to it. Our most serious infrastructure and service delivery issue in the city is the condition of our sewer network, particularly in the most densely populated parts of the city, which is why you may have seen I visited Khayelitsha to look at this and talk about this on my very first day in office. We have managed the crisis in the short term through significant additional spending on things called jet vac trucks in the adjustment budget, which is essentially a vehicle that can proactively clear sewer lines by jetting water down them, and can clear blocked sewer lines reactively with very powerful vacuum. But frequent sewer blockages and leaks in the most dense parts of the city are long-term issues that seriously threaten the dignity of residents. And it's going to take some major additional infrastructure spend to sort it out. I've personally spent many days and hours in Cape Town's poorest communities looking at overflowing sewers by their dozens and hundreds, and have made it very clear that cannot continue to be associated with Cape Town's service delivery story. It has to improve, and it is going to improve by major investment in infrastructure. In these first 100 days, we've put in place an ambitious plan for more dignified sanitation, including the existing multi-billion rand upgrades to our wastewater treatment works, but also nearly quadrupling the kilometers of pipe replacement annually, from about 23 kilometers of pipe replacement in this financial year to 75 kilometers in the coming financial year, and then over 100 kilometers next year. More preventative jetting to clear sewers, more budget for critical sewer pump station upgrades and full replacement of those pump stations, and more vehicle and manpower to respond to sewer spills more efficiently and timeously. Water quality and pollution activists around the city, of whom there may be some here today, have often complained about the tin ear treatment that they've received and the city's unwillingness to share data and a general attitude of opacity. Soon, I'd hoped to do it by today's speech, but once again, the lawyers are looking over it. We will launch a new water quality data policy that we're currently putting the final touches on, that will set the gold standard for data openness in South Africa, and will send a powerful signal both to our administration and to the city about our government and our philosophical approach to transparency. Our message to the administration has been clear. No one should struggle to get access to information which is clearly in the public interest in Cape Town. The standard answer to PIA applications should be yes. There has to be a really good reason in Cape Town why a PIA application should be declined. Our recently launched citywide Spring Clean campaign has already seen communities from all over Cape Town come forward and start doing their own cleanups. This is personally really important to me. And the idea behind this is to generate a sense of civic pride in our city again, and to get communities to volunteer and to help us in ensuring that Cape Town becomes cleaner. We employ 1,600 full-time cleanup staff around the city. And sometimes when you go into communities, you will think that we are hardly making a dent at all. There is absolutely a widespread culture of littering and illegal dumping in Cape Town, and we have to turn that around over the long term by rolling up our sleeves and sending out the message that it is not only up to the city to clean up and up to those full-time staff. It is up to every resident to take responsibility for making sure that littering and illegal dumping does not happen around them. So we really want to foster a spirit of community pride and mutual respect in our city that starts with getting together to clean up our city home. And the response so far has been great. And it's not only about inspiring volunteerism. As part of this campaign, we're also offering rewards to residents who can help us catch illegal dumpers in our parks and sewers. I am unfortunately not allowed to issue law enforcement instructions, which I'd dearly love to do. But I've asked our officers to please prioritize finding litter bugs and illegal dumpers. And they have taken up the challenge with enthusiasm. I now get weekly stats on a Friday afternoon on the number of fines that they've issued in the prior week on littering and dumping. And I've promised that the officer who writes the most fines for littering, I will take to lunch personally. Exactly, carrot and stick. I now turn to the burgeoning issue of homelessness in our city. This is an extremely complex issue that involves intractable social problems like poverty, mental illness, both diagnosed and undiagnosed, addiction, family breakdown, and domestic violence. We have committed ourselves to addressing this in a caring and sustainable way that affirms the dignity of every resident of Cape Town, whether you have a home or not, and offers them maximum assistance and opportunity to improve their lives and get off the street. We believe that no person should live on the streets. It is unsafe, unhealthy, and undignified for them, and it is also unsafe and unhealthy and undignified for the communities around them. I don't think that there's a policy issue that I've spent more time thinking and reading about in these last 3 months, and I've met with legal experts, law professors. I've read countless court judgments, detailed policy papers, and have tried to begin to formulate a plan in my mind and in the city team. As a first step to addressing this problem, we've added 10 million rand to our Safe Spaces program in the January adjustment budget to help expand the number of available beds at the city's safe spaces, to help people off the streets sustainably. And there will be more where that comes from in the main budget coming up in a couple of months. We've also, after a lot of thinking and speaking with those legal experts, as I said, decided to go forward with the Cape Town's Streets and Public Places bylaw because it better aligns with our country's constitution and Bill of Rights than the current bylaw does, and is more in keeping with our commitment to build a more inclusive and caring Cape Town. There's been a lot of misinformation about this bylaw, but the amended bylaw requires that alternative accommodation must be offered by the city and ensures that sleeping and camping overnight in public places is no longer classified as an automatic offence if no other choice is available to the person. The amendments effectively decriminalize this conduct where no alternative is available, while still ensuring that every intervention from social workers to addiction programs to job seeker programs that the city offers are oriented towards assisting people to move off the streets. And I've also written to the Office of the National Prosecuting Authority and to the Magistrates Forum to ask for a meeting with them to discuss more proactive alternative sentencing, rather than only relying on the criminal justice system. Related to this, one policy that I've also spent a lot of time thinking about and working on, because it is so important to what we're trying to achieve in Cape Town, is land release for more affordable housing. In the past month, we've gone back and forth on several iterations of a plan to increase the size of our land release pipeline to be released for affordable housing along key transport routes and close to key economic nodes across our metro. This includes compressing the time of processes that we control, such as zoning and approvals, to pre-packaging, so-called pre-packaging land for release. Again, the outcome that we want is very clear. We must deliver our existing social housing projects in the earliest possible timeframes. They can't be caught up in red tape for 5, 6, 8, and even more years, including those in central Cape Town. And we must speed up the land release pipeline for more and bigger projects. Turning to transport. This week, we finally got the N2 My City Express route running again. Again, this was something that in my first week in office, I put a lot of pressure on the team to get done in 3 months. Of course, those negotiations had been going on for long before that, so I certainly can't take all the credit for those negotiations. But that route has not functioned for 3 years because of key contractual disputes between us and essentially taxi unions in Cape Town. But finally, as of Saturday, the key route for our city's economy is now back in action. And what a joy it was to be on that bus on Saturday and to see buses starting to run behind us, and on the way back to see buses running on the other side of the N2 for the first time again in 3 years, going in both directions to Khayelitsha and to Mitchell's Plain. This is especially important in the context of the near total collapse of passenger rail services along the Central Line in Cape Town, with more than 900,000 people, a truly extraordinary number, who used to rely on the proper functioning of that Central Line, now effectively stranded from a public transport point of view. This has put enormous pressure on minibus taxis who are bursting at the seams on the Golden Arrow bus system. And now with the resumption of this N2 Express, which took us about 17, 18 minutes, albeit on a Saturday, I have no doubt it'll be slower during the week, but really an efficient, clean, world-class, affordable, on-time, reliable service. Of course, we're continuing to push the issue with the national government on the reassignment of rail service, as I spoke to you about the last time, to the local level, because it is absolutely clear, and all of my meetings with them, I feel absolutely no hesitation in stating this publicly, all of my meetings with them over the last 3 months have confirmed my suspicion before the election that the passenger rail agency is not going to be capable of getting South Africa's train services up and running again. And in fact, just yesterday, I see that is it yesterday or 2 days ago, that another regional manager has been suspended without explanation in Cape Town. So many of PRASA's lines and stations have now been vandalized to the point of complete disappearance. And PRASA has lost thousands of kilometers of copper cable and hundreds of kilometers of track in the city during the many months of, particularly during the many months of the national lockdown. This has meant, as I've said, that more than 900,000 Cape Townians who live along the Central Line cannot get to work, especially those living on the Cape Flats. So we have to carry on pushing this. I think this might be the toughest public policy battle of our coming term, but to me, it is absolutely essential to push it. It builds on our goal of stepping into the gap to protect residents where there are clear and obvious examples of national government failure. My firm sense is that we can be the accredited rail licensing authority in Cape Town. The idea is not to run the service ourselves, because there would be such a vast investment required now just to get it back up and running that it would be beyond the city's capacity to invest. But we absolutely should be the licensing authority, And I have no doubt that in the coming years, there will be a reconfiguration of the rail sector in South Africa, not because national government may want to, but because it has to get the system, to get the trains and the system back up and running again. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, I turn to safety. I firmly believe that there is no trade-off between our values and the security of our communities. In fact, caring for our residents demands that we have safer streets through investment in a better equipped, better staffed, better trained, more professional and caring metropolitan police force. We have prioritized even more funding for safety and security in the adjustment budget, augmenting already existing programs to combat crime in Cape Town, again, where SAPS has so meaningfully failed. And I am so excited, and that's why I wanted to end with this, to see the early impact of these programs in last week's official crime statistics, a story that didn't get nearly enough attention in the weekend press. But the Western Cape is now the only place in the country where crime stats are dropping precipitously. And if you look at where those precincts are, they are all the 11 precincts where we have deployed our LEAP officers in the city of Cape Town, including massive drops in murder and attempted murder in places like Kales River, Kraaifontein, Mitchell's Plain, Grassy Park, Nyanga. It is showing, it is the first early evidence, this is the first year of that deployment, so I'm conscious of falling into the correlation and causation trap, but it is the first early evidence that that investment is working, and I'm really proud and excited of that. Our LEAP officers are now recovering illegal guns from our streets at the rate of 1 per day. And on Thursday last week was their record day when they recovered 5 in 1 day. And I must report to you, as Professor Guy Lamb has said, who now works for President Ramaphosa, that the SAPs are the biggest arms dealers in South Africa. His words, not mine. But at least 1 out of every 3 of the illegal firearms that we recover in Cape Town are SAPS issued Z88s. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I want to bring us back to the point of all this. South Africa urgently needs a beacon of hope. South Africa needs to be able to look around and see that our nation has a city that is caring, committed, non-corrupt, morally courageous, is prepared to take on the tough issues, and is absolutely committed to professionalism and to building a capable state. Cape Town will be that city. These first 100 days have put us on that path. We have made a good start, but it is just a start. All of the hard work lies ahead. All of the difficult challenges lie ahead, as does the opportunity to do something really important for Cape Town and for South Africa. I love this job. I'm deeply committed to this clear sense of higher purpose, and I'm happy to be held to account on our performance. Help us ensure that the next 100 days and the next 1,000 days after that keep moving us forward to the achievement of our profound moral goal. And I'm confident, Mr. Chairman, that when we meet again to further reflect on how we are doing, when enough time has elapsed to see our policies and bold initial steps bear fruit, we will all agree that Cape Town is a more caring, more inclusive, more prosperous, more united, more optimistic, safer, and freer place. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your address. Okay, we're going to open up to questions now. Let's start with John Mattison over there.
Are we on? Yeah. I know there are jurisdictional issues about control of the parliamentary precinct and so on, but I'd be very interested in your analysis of these fires. Is it organized? Is there a political component and so on? And then the second question is, my understanding is that the copperheads were very successful at stopping copper theft, and I know they were closed down by central government. Is there something possibility of reviving it?
Do you want me to answer each one?
Yes, or do you
Okay.
want to do them in a bunch?
I love that. No, I'll do one at a time. That's fine. I'll try and keep it brief so that we can get through more. I love I think it's Orwell. Is it Orwell who said, never ascribe to conspiracy what can best be explained by incompetence? That's my working assumption on the fires, I'm afraid. That's certainly what our fire officers report. And we put out publicly that report, and people said it was politicized that I released that publicly. But the fact is, when the professionals produce a report, then they're going to say it's politicized if you don't release it. So I thought the best thing to do was just to release it without any comment. And essentially what that report finds, although again, I add the proviso, it's not a forensic fire investigation, it's the reflections of our fire professionals, just find massive across the board systemic and equipment failure. And that's basically, what caused it. We still do have a metals theft unit. It has 49 officers. But let me tell you, we are facing an unprecedented pandemic of metals theft at the moment. We track the numbers very, very closely, and we are spending millions of rands every week on replacing copper. There are some parts of Cape Town at night that look like Johannesburg, because there's just no lights on. And we don't want to look like Johannesburg. And that's simply because the copper theft is just rampant. It's you replace streetlight cables, and then the very next day, or 2 or 3 days after that, they are stolen again. So we have 49 officers dedicated to this. But you can just imagine a city of Cape Town size. It's literally like trying to find a needle in a haystack. So usually what we find is that those officers catch people where a resident has intercepted someone trying to cut cable and has phoned us and said, I'm keeping this person here, or I'm waiting by the site until you get here. And then we rush there and catch someone. We are investing in some pretty exciting technology, which we tested just a couple of nights ago, which is essentially infrared technology that is able to pick up different kinds of smoke. It's able to differentiate between brush fire, felt fires, and rubber burning, because the most common telltale sign of copper theft is actually burning rubber, so that they can get the copper out of the cable casing. So we are working on this a lot. I've also spoken to General Patakile. We met last week, because I'm absolutely convinced that the scale is now so enormous that there has to be an organized crime element to this. This is not just poor people stealing cable for the daily meal. It is tons and tons. There's got to be a way of moving that much copper, of smelting it, of getting it out of the country. And I haven't seen any evidence that our country's crime intelligence services are working on this problem. And so we are taking that up with them and really pushing them to give us some kind of feedback on what they are doing to bust copper crime organized gangs. Thanks. Yeah, we still have them. That's what I'm saying. They are the 49 people that I was talking about. That's our own copperheads.
Right.
We now call them the metals theft unit, but it's the same thing.
Douglas Scott.
Thanks, Brent. 2 questions. The first one is, you mentioned the crackdown on illegal dumping and the LEAP officers, which is very glad to hear your feedback on that so far. And you also mentioned that other programs are being done to reduce and mitigate crime in Cape Town, especially in neglected and informal areas of the city. What other programs is the city doing, especially ones that don't involve policing or like aggressive policing, to reduce crime? And then the second question.
Sorry, you said that don't involve or do involve?
That do not involve
that do not
the
involve.
police.
Okay.
Because I know the city has got very limited abilities to sort of deploy any policing presence, whether it's Metro and definitely not SAPS. The second question, though, is regarding the C3 notification system and its ability to deliver in neglected and informal communities in Cape Town. I suppose just the C3 system generally. What efforts are being made to enhance the delivery on C3 reports to fix broken infrastructure, and especially in informal settlements and poor communities. Thank you.
Okay, so just before this engagement, I came from our call center where I spent an hour taking some calls this morning and getting, I've been speaking a lot to them about the C3 improvements. We've got to fix that system. I presume everyone knows what C3 is, so I won't go into too much detail, but essentially the number one complaint that we get is that someone gets an SMS saying that their matter is closed. That's the word that's used when they're sitting still looking at the pothole. And the reason for that is there's actually quite a really simple reason behind the curtain, and that is that if 50 people report the same pothole, which frequently happens, then the department roads will go and close 49 of those complaints and keep one open until it's done. But so they think that that's very efficient. But of course, as a member of the public, the signal that you're getting is that your matter's been attended to when it hasn't. So we're doing some improvements there, and I'm still not happy with the level of improvement. I think it's still a bit too complex for the public. So we'll spend a few more weeks on that, and we're going to make some system improvements there that I hope will stop that problem in its tracks. And I must just tell you one funny story. This morning I spent taking some random calls. The first lady that called into the city, I actually remember her name, but I won't say it in case she's here. She has lived in Cape Town for only a year. She lives in Sea Point, and she was calling the city to complain about the number of seagulls that were eating out of city dustbins. I wasn't quite sure how to resolve her complaints, but that was the first call that I took this morning. Then on the non-policing interventions, look, you're right to say that we have limited scope there. I think that the most important thing is actually for communities to have beautiful community facilities. And we really have an extraordinary network of lovely swimming pools, of libraries, of parks, of community halls, of clinics. Some of them are in poor condition. And that's because, well, I think there's some other explanations as well about people not just taking personal ownership of their job and showing pride in their work. But also there is a budget question there. And so the way that it used to work is essentially the repair and maintenance budget for community facilities has not increased in probably 6 or 7 years. So those facilities had to be kept to the right standard with an ever decreasing budget in real terms. And so I think one of the most important interventions that I've made in these 3 months, not that it's kind of anything front and center, but behind the scenes, sometimes these small changes make a big difference, is actually to say we are going to catch up on our repairs and maintenance budget by redirecting significant additional resources to R&M, repairs and maintenance. So hopefully that shows in the years ahead with better community facilities that give people a sense of pride in the community, and also offer a staging ground for a whole lot of other people to come in and offer top-up services. There's groups offering swimming lessons at our municipal pools. They can't do that if the pool is in poor condition. There are people offering reading lessons and school top-up lessons at our libraries. And so that when you have beautiful community facilities that do their job, there's a whole lot of add-on services that can use those facilities. It's not just about their primary purpose. So I think that's the most important thing. There is also a small program which is having significant results, and that is an urban design program looking at some safety design features that can make a difference. And so, lots of residents in our council rental stock, essentially our social housing units, say that the lanes between those units offer a convenient getaway for criminals, petty thieves, and sometimes serious gangsters. And so they are asking us either to turn those lanes into community gardens or to close them altogether. And where we have done that, where we've started to do that, this is last year already, the last couple of years, we've actually seen a significant decrease in violent crime in those immediate vicinities. So you can actually geolocate every single crime in the city, and you see that those social housing units, those rental stock units, are absolute hotspots. But when you make some design changes, you can actually reduce the incidence of crime there. So there is that also on the go. And I think those are probably the most important non-policing interventions.
Right, thanks. Is there, did I see a question over there? Over here?
Thank you for a most optimistic forecast for the future. The only part was the end. You didn't seem to be all that optimistic about the passenger rail system.
No.
And I'm wondering, does the City of Cape Town not have any legal means of enforcing the government to hand it over to the city? Now, I heard you say that the city, of course, does not have the resources. I'd just like to cite my experience of Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires had a defunct passenger rail system. They handed it over to private enterprise. They raised bonds, and they transformed what was a defunct system into a vibrant, every 5 minutes you have trains going up and down the tracks. The stations, which are a fantastic asset, turned into little shopping centers, etc. Is this not possible to do?
I think that it is absolutely possible to do that. That's exactly the model that I have in mind. The point I was making is that it's not possible for the city to carry the cost of that investment. It must be done by the private sector. So the city has to play a licensing and regulatory role and unlock the network for private investment and use the more profitable lines, the busier lines, to cross-subsidize the less profitable lines. And there's no doubt in my mind that just by necessity, that is where we will arrive in the coming years. The question is, how long will it take for us to arrive at that realization, and how much infrastructure will be left when we get there? And so the cost of rebuilding the infrastructure just increases exponentially every day that we delay that. So there are some legal routes available to us that we are absolutely exploring. It's undoubtedly going to be a tough fight. I will tell you, because he's now been suspended, that my very first meeting with the chief executive of PRASA, the very first words that he said to me was, "You are never touching my trains." And I just kind of burst out laughing, because I said, "But no one's on the trains; they're not running. So what good is it? What good is it for you to hold them when they're not working? Surely that's the outcome we should agree on, that this train should work." He's now been fired, and he's challenging his sacking in court. So who knows where that will end? But I can tell you, PRASA has publicly, and not only publicly, legally, to the Cape High Court, they've made a commitment that they are going to get the central line up and running by July. And Minister Mbulula came to Cape Town and repeated that, said that the central line will be running by July. Now, let me tell you, sir, when I hear those two people saying that, it is the clearest indication that they haven't got the first clue of what it's going to take to get the central line up and running. It's going to take years, not months, because the infrastructure is completely destroyed. There are 10,000 people living on the train tracks. So the idea that you are going to move all those people, give them alternative accommodation, which you're legally required to do, fix the infrastructure, and get it all running by July is laughable. So when I hear that from the senior management of PRASA, I realize we're in for a tough road ahead.
Marilyn Keegan. Just wait for the mic.
Hi, I must say that I really feel Cape Town is in safe hands.
Thank you.
I do have a question though, and that is balancing creating one of the great cities of the world and stopping what you call a decline. How do you balance that with, I don't usually go down Strand Street. I usually go around around the harbour. But the other day, Saturday, I was in Strand Street and I was shocked by what has been Strand Street is now an informal settlement.
Yes.
And while I am extremely sympathetic to the plight of those that don't have homes, how do you balance those imperatives? And how do you get around that? Bearing in mind that you obviously are very aware of the problem, and from what you say, you've taken this problem very deeply into your thought process. But a visitor coming to South Africa, and Strandsby being one of the main entrances to Cape Town, it kind of, when you say you kind of create the greater city, it just, when I was driving down there on Saturday, I just thought, this doesn't look like a great city. I just like your response.
Yep. No, I perfectly hear that, and I've heard it from all quarters. There was an investor who came to see me who left Johannesburg in the early 2000s or late 90s, and said that the things that made him leave Johannesburg at that stage and move his business to Cape Town, he's now seen in the Cape Town inner city as well, and he's very worried about that. And so it really undermines our investment case and everything that I've said if we simply lose public spaces and public facilities to this burgeoning homelessness. So it is occupying a huge amount of my thought process and reading time. As I said, it is a very complex and intractable problem. There's things that we have a very limited scope in addiction treatment, absolutely no scope at all in mental illness treatment, and of course no scope in broken homes and broken families, and very limited scope in domestic violence as well. So it's really, really tough. But what we have to do is make sure that we do everything possible to lead with a caring, put a caring foot forward first in all of our interactions, because there's no doubt that whether we are in the lockdown, in the disaster regulations, or outside of them, it's just not legally feasible to remove those residents. It is not. Even outside the lockdown. It's really important that I convey that, because there's been an expectation built up that as soon as the lockdown is over, sorry, not the lockdown, the disaster regulations are over, that everyone can just kind of be neatly packed up. That is not the case. Every single person has to go through a process of a social worker intervention, a job seekers intervention, alternative accommodation, addiction treatment, and only as a last resort can you rely on law enforcement if there are no other alternatives available. So that is going to be a long and really tricky process, but it is essential that we can't shy away from it or throw up our hands and say it's too difficult, because as I say, that would entail the real deterioration of the inner city in a way that would be very harmful for everyone else in Cape Town. And I would just make the point that so much of the debate in South Africa is only focused on those less secure or vulnerable people that we can see, and not those who we cannot see. And so when investment flees Cape Town and business flees Cape Town, there are hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of other people who desperately need opportunity and work in the Cape Town who pay the price for that. But because we can't immediately see them, they are not often spoken or thought of. But our responsibility is to everyone, to both the seen and the unseen, to do the right thing by the city. And we will do that.
I have a lot of hands. The mayor has to get to a caucus, so I want questions that are short. We don't have time for anybody
And
making
I will try
speeches.
to
Please.
rein myself in
Right.
as well.
Anthony Butler.
Hello, Geordin.
Hello, Prof.
I wanted to ask about what happens when you come into conflict with national government. So you've talked about PRASA, but in many of the areas in which you have ambitions, whether it's human settlements or transport, safety and security, land use, you're going to come into conflict with national government entities as well as with provincial ones. And I wonder what your approach to that is. So on the one hand, both you and the Premier have tended to take a what works, depoliticizing, avoiding conflict with national government. But on the other hand, where you show signs of frustration with PRASA, we can see a different tone and approach. And we often see that with sometimes I think with the DA at national national government level that we see more open political conflict. And I wonder what your position is. So do you think that there is a good deal of scope for negotiation with national government, or do you feel that this is in a more open sense a political conflict?
But maybe you just want to repeat as you understood the question. I don't think people heard in the room.
Oh, okay. So it's a perceptive question. It's basically saying, what we've said and what we've done is to try and work together to sort out problems with national government. Both me and Alan. That's what the prof is referring to. But then on certain other issues, we've taken a more strident tone. And do I think that there are opportunities to work together, or is it all going to kind of end in a bun fight? So that's basically the. All right. So let me say I'm absolutely always prepared as a first port of call to try and resolve things and to work together, because if you share a desired outcome, then I can't really see what the problem is with giving the control of the train system to Cape Town. If we agree that the outcome is to get the trains running so that people can get to work, then surely the only question is how best to do that. And if that can be best done by devolving it, then let's devolve it. So if we can negotiate on the basis of a shared understanding of the outcome that we are trying to achieve for society, then we can work together really well. And my message has been use us as a way to try a whole lot of interesting things in exactly the same way that we're doing on the IPPs now, as the first city to go and do this. Now, we may run up against Minister Mantashe, who I know you've written a lot about in that regard. But again, my question is, surely we share the outcome of wanting to solve South Africa's energy crisis. Surely the only question should be how to do that as quickly as humanly possible. And if we agree on that outcome, then it's a no-brainer that Cape Town should be allowed to do this as quickly as possible. Now, if you stop us from doing that, then I question your commitment to the outcome. And then I'm absolutely prepared to have a fight, because the outcome for me is non-negotiable. We have to protect residents from the failure of these national entities. We have to do what's right by our economy, get people into work, and that requires us to have stable electricity supply. If you disagree with us on that outcome, then I really question your commitment to the country and to sorting out this crisis. The same goes for PRASA. The same goes for the police. I said to Becky Tsele, if you genuinely care about people being safer in Cape Town, why should you spend more than a minute worrying about what the Cape Town Metro Police are doing? Just know that we share that concern, we share that desired outcome, and we are working day and night to make Cape Town safer. You should be out there encouraging and cheering us on and saying, at least here is an activist government who is pursuing whatever avenue they can to transform their city into a safer society. Instead, it all seems to be about territorialism and protecting turf. And that's just not healthy for South Africa, and it doesn't deliver the outcomes we want. So on those things, I'm more than happy to have a fight.
Terry Crawford-Brown, question?
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, you will recall that when you were here in September, I raised the issue of the closure of the Rheinmetall Denel munitions factory in Somerset West in Makassar, and the redevelopment of the land there for solar and wind energy. And I'm delighted that you're committing Cape Town to get off the Eskom grid. 6 months later, what is your commitment to helping us close down that ammunition factory that is totally untenable in a residential area such as Makassar, and to create more jobs and better paying jobs and killing people in Yemen?
Thank you, Terry. Terry asked a similar question in October, so I did expect that one. I've sent a request to our environmental enforcement officers a simple request. There's been 2 serious explosions at the factory. What has the city done from our perspective to satisfy ourselves that the facility is safe for its location inside the city of Cape Town? So we do have some regulatory responsibility there in environmental enforcement, and they are going to come back to me about what enforcement action they are taking about those explosions. I will just say on the second part that the land next door, which you're very familiar with, is called Part de Vlei, which, well, I won't go into the history of how the city acquired that land, but it shouldn't have. But nevertheless, we have it now, and it's not suitable for housing. It's not at all suitable for housing, and it is suitable for renewable energy. So it might be one of the first projects that we roll out as a solar farm.
Okay, I had a question there.
I'm not the chairman, sir. There's a very, very eager question over there.
Sure.
Mr. Mayor, taking you back to your first day in office and the important signal about sewerage, I'd like to raise the situation that Rhondda Vlei and Sewerage Vlei,
Yes.
both which have raw sewage being poured into them. And my question to you is the KPAs that get set for city management. My understanding is that any expenditure over 200,000 Rand gets referred to the Auditor General, and there's the risk of the city having its clean audit reports blotted with a adverse report. And for that reason, the money that is needed for the corkscrew machinery that would lift the sewage 3 meters, 230,000 Rand for each spiral, is not being spent. Do you have any comment on that, please?
Yeah. So this goes to the heart of my unhappiness about our performance on capital expenditure and investment. We are writing down in this year 2.7 billion Rand in unspent capital budget. And we have a situation where we don't have the screws that we need, we don't have the trucks that we need, we don't have the pump stations, the expensive pumps units that we need. It really is not satisfactory. And the consequence is, as you say, that for the first time in 2 years, this past weekend was the very first time that the Zandvlei was open again to the public. And we hope that it's able to stay open, but the others are still closed. And that is as a result of the underinvestment, primarily as a result. There's other contributing factors as well, but primarily as a result of underinvestment in wastewater treatment works. So one of the things that I've done is I've changed the way that our executive directors are performance managed. So what would happen is that at the beginning of the year, you would commit to spend 100 on, this is on capital expenditure now. You would commit to spend 100. Then in the adjustment budget, you would write that down to 80. And then you would spend 75. And so you say, look, pat, we've spent 75 of 80. Actually, you've spent 75 of 100. So from now on, they will be performance assessed on their main budget spending commitments, not on their adjustment budget commitments. We are not going to write down capital expenditure in the adjustment budget. If that leads to massive under expenditure, then we must wear it. We must explain it. We don't just write it down. So I'm really applying the pressure on capital expenditure. And just yesterday, we were dealing with a sewer overflow in Noordhoek. So I hear some residents who know what I'm talking about. And the explanation I got from the city was that the big trucks that we have can't get to that particular place. They need a smaller truck, and that smaller truck has been broken for 3 months. And we are writing down 2.5 billion Rand in capital expenditure. We can go and buy 10 new trucks if we want to. So this is the kind of thing that I've got to get to grips with and got to get into the detail. But the pressure from the top is certainly being felt. And the message out there is you better spend those budgets. I'm not letting them write it down ever again.
Advocate Paul Hoffman.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Mayor, I want to come back to the informal settlements, not in Strand Street, but on the verge of Baden-Powell Drive. You mentioned the 10,000 living on the central railway line. There are many more who live in wetlands or below the floodplain and generally just create more and more administrative problems for the city. One of the problems about overcrowding in informal areas is that when there's a fire, your trucks can't get in and thousands of people are left destitute. The tactic of your predecessors has been to create temporary relocation areas and promise those who are shoveled into these 6x4 structures that they will be given proper houses in a few months. It doesn't happen. Temporary relocation areas become permanent relocation areas, and your high road to the future looks a little tricky for those who are stuck in the temporary relocation areas. I'd like to know from you, what is your city going to do under your leadership about ending temporary relocation areas and about putting people who are left homeless by fires that are totally predictable and not dealt with by the city because the overcrowding is allowed in such a way that fire services can't get in. What are you going to do about the inadequately housed in our city?
Okay.
Paul, can you hand it to Renette?
So let me just say, Paul, that we are legally required to offer alternative accommodation. So it's not possible to move completely away from some form of alternative accommodation when people have to move off a piece of land or are left destitute by tragedy or whatever the case is. We have to provide that. And because it has to be built sometimes overnight or very quickly, and it has to be done for much cheaper than what one would spend on a so-called RDP, now called B&G house, it is of a kind of TRA standard, the one that you are very familiar with. I think the mistake is in making people think that it's just a temporary solution until a proper RDP or B&G house can be built, because that is, by definition, a very, very long-term process. But what really, that's just kind of the brief answer to your question, but what really excites me is in the upgrading of informal settlements in situ space, where so many people are going ahead and buying 6 or 8 or 10 shacks on the open market, and they are putting up a building of 9 or 18 or even 27 flats, essentially, micro flats. And they're doing it in informal settlements across Cape Town. And of course, the planning environment, the kind of stuck in its ways city planning environment sees that as a problem. And in fact, we sometimes issue fines to those builders to tell them to stop. And I think that one of the most exciting conversations I'm having now is about changing that mindset to saying, actually, those micro developers, those entrepreneurs who are doing that are a big part of the solution, because they are providing affordable housing, rental stock at a pace far quicker than the city or national government or province ever can, by the thousands and thousands each year. So we shouldn't see them as a planning problem. We should see them as part of the planning solution, and figure out a way that we can help those entrepreneurs, those micro developers, build structures that are structurally safe and fire safe from a fire perspective, and otherwise help them facilitate their construction and their investment rather than stand in their way. And I think that actually offers more hope for the problem you've outlined than continuous distant TRAs.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to congratulate you on your first 100 days in office, and we look forward to seeing what you do in the next several thousand days. I'd also like to congratulate the ward councillors, the DA ward councillors, and what they're doing. Nicola Joel and the Atlantic Seaboard and Kevin R. Singh and Ursula Barnes, they are making real changes in the wards. And I see changes in places like Atlantis as well, which has now got a DA mayor for the first time ever. But what I wanted to ask you was, what is the city doing to revitalize the film industry?
Sorry, the which industry?
The film industry.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you so much for mentioning our ward councillors. Wow, sometimes they have a thankless job. They really get it in the neck from residents all day. And that really is heartwarming to hear. Thank you very much, and I will convey that message to them. And they absolutely deserve a lot of credit for all the good work that we do. Sue, I'm thrilled to be able to tell you, absolutely thrilled. This is really exciting. Our permit office tells us that last week there were 78 film shoots in Cape Town. 78 in 1 week. So there is no doubt that the film industry is roaring back into business. And we are now considering even further what we can do by significantly lowering our permit fees to encourage them even further. There are certain costs that we have to incur, like traffic officers and road closures and so on, which some people get very annoyed about, by the way. But it is a massive industry in Cape Town, and it is thrilling to see it coming back in full force.
Thank you very much. I'm terribly sorry. I know there's been a lot of hands. Some have been up for quite a while, but we are completely out of time. The mayor has to get to a caucus meeting. I think you all really want him to be there. not be late for it. Thank you very much. And
Thank you very much.
we have a little present for you from our...
Thank you.
I know this doesn't look good, but it's just a cartoon from our resident cartoonist, Tony Grogan.
Oh, thank you very much. That's so lovely. Thank you, everyone. Lovely to see you.
Thank you, everybody.